This, in other words, is not dependency on the Athabasca tar sands and the Prime Minister's new target for production. There, it used to be that we wanted to take, the federal government wanted to take our current 1.2 million barrels of oil a day and up it to 5 million barrels of oil a day. The latest target from the Harper government is we want to expand tar sands production. And I say tar sands deliberately for those who think I haven't been updated by the PR people from the province of Alberta. I know I'm supposed to call it oil sands, but as someone I know says, if you want to plug a leaky boat, you don't use oil, you use tar. And there's something about the bitumen that looks a lot more like tar than like oil. So we're going to continue to call them what they are. The people who want to see the tar sands expand to 6 million barrels of oil a day in the federal government would skew all the rest of our policies to meet that target. And I submit to you that that is less a matter of environmental disaster, and it is a threat to the health of a diverse economy across Canada and to the essence of a country that functions as a democracy and not as a petrostate. The first time that I ever helped to organize a conference in the Metro Toronto Convention Centre, it was 1988, and I was working in government, and that conference in the last week of June was called Our Changing Atmosphere, Implications for Global Security. I think that was an important title. The climate change conference was not about the environment in 1988, it was about the implications for global security, and we are increasingly realizing that that was the correct way to categorize the issue. Climate change is primarily and overwhelmingly the largest threat to our security. In these hallways were some of the greatest scientists of their day. People like Stephen Schneider, Dr. Stephen Schneider, who died tragically just a few weeks ago as his plane was landing in Heathrow. One of the real pioneers of climate change science, was here in Toronto in those early days of discussing what governments should and must do. Ralph Torrey was there too. Ralph, who's there, and now I'm so proud, is in the Green Party. Ralph was there now and was there then and now as a leader in energy efficiency, demand-side management, and the policies of how to have an energy plan that is sensible for our economy and makes the strides we need to make towards a carbon-neutral future. And yet here we are all those years later. It's extraordinary, 22 years later in the same conference facility. And we are now in a country that has become a rogue state on the climate agenda, that is the only nation that ratified Kyoto, that has moved away and denounced, repudiated legally binding targets. It is a shameful thing for Canadians because we used to be in the lead. On doit réveiller tout le monde à la menace de changement climatique. On doit agir avec urgence. La crise des changements climatiques va changer notre monde. Et vraiment, actuellement, la crise de réchauffement planétaire a déjà changé notre monde et menacé notre avenir et pour l'avenir pour nos enfants et nos petits-enfants. This summer of 2010 will likely go down in history as the summer of climate emergency, but it won't be the last one. I think you all know that June was the hottest June historically on record, breaking all the temperature records, according to the US agency, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration. They found that the month of June 2010 was not only the hottest June historically in reference to any previous 20th century averages, but it was the 304th consecutive month in which records were broken. There is no longer any point in trying to deny the science of climate change. The fact that it's even a conversation is more deeply shameful than anything else about this topic. We've seen humanitarian disasters through this summer. For China, with its horrible landslides and mudslides, the drought in Niger leaving villages empty with dead livestock left behind, and most desperately in Pakistan. And these are due to extreme weather events that are completely consistent with the warming atmosphere, the less secure world that our fossil fuel addiction has brought us. And in this summer of climate emergency, we have seen the Government of Canada commit significant new resources. And I think we need to look at where those resources were dedicated. We were told that in the budget of 2010, that with a $56 million deficit, this country, rather $56 billion deficit, this country was not going to ignore the need for belt tightening, that was absolutely critical. And the belt tightening particularly was a complete freeze on spending in the Department of Defense. It was something of a surprise then to see $16 billion announced to purchase fighter jets, 65 Lockheed Martin F-35 fighter jets. I was quite interested to know what kind of wondrous machines these would be that would force a government to decide it was the top priority in a summer of climate emergency when we had deficit reductions and a commitment to freezing budgets. Well, I think I should share with you the attributes of this wonderful plane if you haven't heard about them. For one thing, it is a stealth aircraft. It can fly through radar and bomb another country before the country knows we're coming. Did any of us know we were interested in stealth aircraft to start and launch a first strike war before another nation knew we were coming? I think that's quite out of keeping with anything that we can see on our security horizon. It certainly doesn't deal with the climate crisis. It also is great. I mean, it's a really fun plane. I've heard this. Peter MacKay says pilots love flying it. It can take off and land on aircraft carriers, which is fantastic if Canada had any aircraft carriers. I know I'm excited, and the other really cool thing about this plane is that it's unburdened with that troublesome second engine we've always required. The Canadian military has always wanted to have planes with two engines, something about being a really big country, and if you had to go fly to the Arctic, you wouldn't want to lose an engine, not have a second one on board. We've always insisted in the parameters for our military purchases of aircraft that they have two engines. No longer, this is a single-engine plane, but we can rest assured this is another question that the Minister of Defense has already answered. He was asked what happens if an engine fails. I'm so happy to be able to tell you his answer. He said it won't. So there you have it. Now, there was another big spending announcement that was defended this summer. Again, security related, but again, the wrong kind of security. We're going to spend $9 billion on new prisons. I think you'd heard that before, but this summer, Stockwell Day defended that because he's in charge of cutting, right? He's in charge of going through where the Government of Canada is spending money and finding ways to cut. And he was, of course, asked, why would we be spending $9 billion on new prisons when we happen to know that the crime rate is falling? I don't know how many of you heard his answer because it was certainly a sort of a roll in the aisle kind of moment for the media present, because he explained that we needed, it was true, he did admit, that was good, he did admit that the crime rate is falling. But there is an increase, says Stockwell Day, in unreported crime. Yeah. And that, in fact, the media of the room did ask him and say, well, if it's unreported, how do you know about it? And there are other questions that spring to mind, like if you had more prisons, would it make the people who aren't reporting the crime report them? And would the crimes that aren't being reported be the kinds of things that would send people to the new jails you're building? But I was talking about this recently in Orillia, Ontario. We got such a nice big headline in the Orillia papers, but it was because I quoted Orillia. Yes, yay, Orillia! Yay, Valerie Powell! So I figure, you know, I'm a sucker. I love Stephen Leacock writings, and I found a Stephen Leacock quote that was so appropriate. I really felt suddenly that I wanted to share it with you. Stephen Leacock on the subject of statistics. In ancient times, they had no statistics, so they had to fall back on lies. And so, with no further reference to Stockwell Day, I just wanted to mention that on the unreported crime front, it turned out, and thanks to the National Post for pointing this out, there actually were statistics that supported what Stockwell Day was saying. It turns out that Canadians have been reporting to Statistics Canada that they are experiencing crime, and when you compare what people say they're doing, it may be like what Alona Doherty said about last night, people who say they're voting 80%, but they're not actually voting. But anyway, Canadians say they're experiencing crime, and then they say they're unlikely to report it. Okay. And so the next question, which of course comes to mind, is where would you get such detailed, useful policy statistics? And of course, it's from the long-form census, which they just killed. So, I mean, I think that there's something funny. I think at some point we'll have to delve deeper into the problem that the Harper government has with the word long in any hyphenated format. The long-form census is out. The long gun registry should be removed, and let's hope the NDP find their courage and keep that from happening. And we know what the Harper government thinks about long-term thinking. But anyway, moving on from long,